Hey folks, check it out. Today we have Jaehun, Jang, and Antonio Stark, team members of Project Divinity, winners of the NASA NSS Ames Space Settlement Grand Prize. Really great episode. They're also going to be teaching us a little bit about Korean space and Korean space development. If you guys like this episode, don't forget to sign up on iTunes, vote us 5, go check us out on YouTube. Just make sure you get the word out. Thanks.
The act of moving onward means we pass these signposts. One of them was first leaving Earth. The next one is hanging out on the moon. What's next? The planets. Onward to the edge. We're moving onward to the edge. Here we are together. This fragile little world. This fragile little world. Onward to the edge. We're moving onward to the edge. Here we are together. This fragile little world.
So you two just won NASA's basically the only thing NASA does for space settlement anymore. You guys just won one of those prizes there. It's a yearly thing. I think we've mentioned this on the show once or twice, but basically it's a contest where a bunch of students and student groups from all over the world get together to design a space settlement, and that's what you guys did.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about that process. You guys, designing space settlements is one of those things that I see a lot of people doing when they first get into space settlement as a subject they're interested in. And it's got its roots, seeing as, Jared O'Neill sparked this whole thing by having his students make a bunch of space settlements. What's your space settlement like? Where'd you come up with the idea? Tell us all about it.
Okay, so our space settlement, actually, personally, it's the seventh space settlement I've built, but this one, the last one, Project Divinity, this one's situated in ELEO, which means Equatorial Low Earth Orbit. And that's, I think, what's special about the space settlements. While other space settlements tend to be on Lagrange points or solar or lunar orbits.
That's interesting because I've seen a couple more people start doing low Earth orbit and Earth orbit space settlements recently. It seems to be like a little bit of a popular thing that's starting to rise.
True, because it's, well, for one thing, easier than other settlements. It's 500 kilometers in orbit, which is like just above, only 100 kilometers above the International Space Station.
It makes a lot of sense, and it's also somewhere we have a lot of experience in developing already. At least as far as space is concerned, we kind of know what we're doing there more than we know what we're doing at any of the L points or around the sun or anything like that.
Right.
Yeah, also we have some benefits since we build the space settlement on the ELEO. And this is very recent research result that we have some very powerful radiation protection on the equatorial orbit. So since we build the settlement on the equatorial low Earth orbit, we can protect our settlement by radiation from solar or outer space more effectively.
Right. We had someone on just recently who talked a little bit about that research, but that does seem to be one of those, that's probably one of the big reasons that people are talking about LEO settlements now is because of this radiation shielding. Radiation shielding, for anyone who doesn't know already, is one of those things that makes the settlements so heavy, so to speak. It requires a great deal of bulk to protect against, and so one of the big questions for settlements outside of Earth and outside of Earth's ability to protect us from radiation was how exactly we're going to get those tons and tons and tons and tons of radiation shielding out there.
Right, I couldn't actually have put it better.
So tell us a little bit about what makes your settlement special. What's different about this settlement than anyone else's?
Well, we already talked about the location, so I think another would be the size of it. I think Jaehun could elaborate more on how small our settlement is, how that could be made possible by these.
Yeah, well, basically, other space settlements and perhaps most space settlements submitted to the contest is very big, very huge. But we designed our space settlement into very small size compared to others because we thought that small size is more effective to protect, as I told, radiation or live in the extreme environments in space, like no atmosphere and radiation. So high possibility of injured. It's very dangerous environment, space is. So we just stepped outside the box and make more higher density of people living residential area, improving high efficient energy source like nuclear fusion and nuclear fusion, including some small solar radiations.
That was one thing, and another thing about smaller settlements that they're I mean easier to build for one thing, and one thing that previous settlements couldn't do that was because of the rotation rate. Prior papers suggested that humans cannot really handle rotation rates about over 1.5 rotation revolution per minute, which means that to get 1G, space settlements have to be in kilometers in diameter, which made it highly impractical. If you want something in kilometer diameter size up in space, that's a lot hard to build. But recent research by Al Globus found that humans can actually survive up to like 6 RPMs with no particular problems. And that's when we start to think, okay, then smaller settlements are possible. It's highly practical, so let's start building stuff.
This is all really impressive stuff. It sounds like you guys have built or designed a really up-to-date modern space element here. You guys are talking about a lot of real cutting-edge research here.
Well, one thing was that, as I've previously mentioned, this is, not Jaehun, but my 7th space settlement that I've constructed. So everything that was kind of like done before, I've actually done it before, and I've kind of like urged my students to start on something new and not to go with conventional space settlements.
And I think that's good. I think that's a really good attitude to take when you're looking at this stuff. I mean, you guys were talking about how so many people submit these huge space settlements, and I think that in many ways comes down to how traditionally space settlements have always been seen as these huge, giant monolith structures in space that are, 10 kilometers long and house 100,000 people and all kinds of things like that. Whereas those are, for all practical purposes, impossible for us to build right now. They're, hundreds of years away. But a smaller space settlement of the size you guys are talking about, what population would you guys have in this one that you built?
10,000 residents, including the tourists, yes.
Right. See, it becomes a little bit more reasonable when you scale it back down like that.
Right. And it's like just, what should I say? Yeah, it's like 200 meters in diameter, in radius, so highly practical.
So what got you guys interested in designing space settlements? It's not exactly your average hobby.
Well, Jaehun, can you talk about yours first, and then I'll elaborate on mine?
Well, actually, I want to be a mechanical engineer, which is designing machines and some facilities in space. So for me, in my case, I just focused on some automations and how machines are work on the space. So space is not familiar environment for mechanical engineering. There is no gravity or smaller gravity, or also it has a radiation, so hazard from outside and some no atmosphere. So I just focused on how machines will work on the space and settlement, and how does these machines and humanoid robots can help people who are living in unfamiliar environment in space.
I imagine it also provides a pretty, fresh set of challenges for someone trying to pursue a career in mechanical engineering. On Earth we have a lot of these problems not solved, obviously, but, you sort of have a playbook, whereas in space we're still writing the rules on how we're going to build stuff up there. How about you, Antonio? How did you get interested in building space settlements?
Well, for me, building space settlements is actually my hobby. I wanted to build space settlements from when I was a kid, from elementary school. Actually, I wanted to build a city in space, but I found that I have no anti-gravitational matter. So that was when I turned my interest in space. I think the first settlement I built was when I was right after I graduated middle school, when I was employed in a Australian organization that built space settlements virtually, and then from then I started on doing researches and other space settlement regarding stuff, building 6 more space settlements in the 4 years that followed, And my dream is actually to be a space settlement architect. If you see my high school transcripts, they all say that my dream is to be a space settlement architect.
That's amazing. Have you talked to or discussed anything with the space architects? If you go to spacearchitects.com, there's a group out there that sort of likes to design space stations and that sort of thing.
No, I actually haven't really met anyone from there. I've been involved in Liport group, if you have heard about them.
Yeah, we had Michael on the show actually.
Right, really.
Yeah.
So Michael was actually my mentor. He recruited me, and kind of like right after I graduated middle school, I've been involved in some projects there for about a year or so, building. I mean, kind of like doing some stuff in space elevators, and really that
Right.
kind of got me the foundation to start a real engineering stuff.
Yeah. Having that foundation in real engineering is very important stuff. And Michael, as some of the listeners might remember, is somewhat of a contentious figure in the world of space and space development. He's always doing something very interesting at the very least. So it sounds like you two have had a passion for space element for a pretty long time. Does that come from the same place I think everyone sort of gets it from? I at least, you look up at the sky as a kid and sort of hope that one day you get to live there.
True that.
Yeah,
We are the stargazers.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that you're seeing more and more people these days take that idea fairly seriously, though. I mean, back in the 70s with O'Neill, you had him having a large following of people, and it was a fairly big topic at the time. And then it died down in the 80s and 90s, and now it's starting to rise back up again. And I think that's pretty interesting. I wonder if that comes just from more people like us who spent their formative years looking up at the stars and watching NASA launches on TV.
So, I mean, personally, I've been thinking about the topic for quite some time, and I think it's like a change of generation. We have that Gemini and Apollo and O'Neill era, and then NASA kind of like died down on their efforts after all the Apollo efforts. I mean, we still have the Curiosity rover, but nothing really big publicly happened after then. But then we start to get more of the space stuff in the media, and I mean, Star Wars and Star Trek certainly helped, and more things like that. And suddenly we have these private ventures coming in, which start doing stuff that NASA kind of stopped doing, and that kind of sparked interest as well. And I think this new generation is where we see a new interest in space with much more practicality happening. Right.
Now, speaking of practicality, one of the subjects that a lot of people are really interested in on this show are hearing different perspectives on space settlement. We try to go and talk to people who maybe don't get talked to all that much in this world, and we try to cover topics that don't get touched upon. And part of that is that we're trying to gather up a bunch of views on what space development, and space settlement means to people from different countries and from different backgrounds. Now, you guys being in Korea, I think that puts you guys in a very interesting spot to talk a little bit about what you guys think about space development and what you guys think your country's view on space development is. Korea is a very, high-tech country. It's, in many ways, in people in the West see it at how people used to see Japan back when I was growing up as this sort of high-tech wonderland that's always at the forefront of stuff. But Korea obviously aren't launching any humans into space just yet. What do you guys think that your country stands on space development and space settlement in particular?
Well, in my opinion, in my opinion, Korea is not very leading edge, not have leading edge technology or very interested about space settlement designing technologies. Well, I hope Korea has a little more interested about it, but as Antonio already mentioned, this Team Divinity is perhaps the unique team who submitted the paper for this contest, and maybe we five member and Antonio is all of students who interested in space settlement in Korea. So yeah, it's really sad, but that may be true. that will be fact.
Why do you think that might be?
Well, Actually, Korean students are more interested about their grade or what they are studying. So, well, I was too. I was more interested about what I have to learn and about what grade, what what exam am I have on next week. That was my first interesting part.
Mm.
But since I have researched about this project and make my own opinion about space settlement and designing my own machines which used for space settlement, it became my first. So if there is chance to contact or know about space settlement, then maybe students in Korea and some engineers will more interested about it. But
Mm.
actually, there's not many chance about contacting with space settlement in Korea.
Mm-hmm.
So that can be some weakness about Korean space settlement technology.
I see, I see. I mean, I guess I could totally. I think that one of the things that the U.S. gets an advantage for is that you get a great deal of time to sort of just fantasize about things over here, and like just imagining the world that could come is something that people just like to do as a hobby here in America and in Europe as well. And so you get a lot of people who take those ideas that may not be super feasible and take them as far as they can, and that's sort of where space settlements are rooted in a great deal here is sort of this image of the future that people sort of delve into quite deeply.
That as well,
Mm.
right? And what I see from Korea, I mean, just to in Korea uniquely, is that we're a small country, and small country means small budgets, and
Mm-hmm.
space isn't really a place that you can go with smaller budgets. And although, I mean, the Korean Aerospace Research Institute, KARI, that's the primary institute in Korea, the government organization in Korea that launches rockets and do all those stuff. Our primary, KARI's primary objective has to be satellites, communication satellites, and not really too much so about space exploration. They are having kind of like an audacious goal. I say audacious with a caution because although I highly applaud the efforts, I think it's going to be some time before it actually comes true. That about sending rovers to Mars, they plan to do it in a few decades, which I think will be probable, but it's kind of like a lot. It's kind of late
Mm-hmm.
considering how China or India does it. And I think we can see that back to how little budget Korea gets, and also a bit into how the Korea U.S. system goes,
Mm-hmm.
because we are still a country at war legally out at war, and because of a contract with the United States, we are not really allowed to research into rocketry that can be turned into missiles.
Mm.
So that was another thing that has been holding our ankles before now. But that area has been getting lot more openings since then. And just I think it was last week. Was it Jaehun that we were invited to the U.S. ROK Civil Space Agreement Treaty, where the United States opened up a lot of resources and windows into how Korea could expand into space,
Mm.
civil.
It's also, I mean, for anyone who doesn't know, and I didn't know this until I looked it up, but Korea's space, Korea's national space program gets something like $500 million worth of funding a year, I believe, which is, I mean, people complain about NASA not getting a lot of money over here, but $500 million is barely anything for space travel. I think that gets you one booster rocket, and halfway across the Pacific these days.
True.
Yeah, it is.
Does Korea have? I know you're talking about these restrictions. Those restrictions are very interesting to me, and I wonder if how does those things and how does the attitude that Korea currently has towards space affect the private sector? Is there a private space sector in Korea?
Well, it's not non-existent, but um, not really existent as well.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Mm-hmm. Probably to the certain same degree that it exists in companies launching communication satellites and what have you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's more about providing parts for satellites,
Mm-hmm.
and I think some parts of the rocketry, but not really more than that.
Right, right, right. That certainly makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think we heard a little bit similar on the what was interesting is when we were talking to people from India, they had a similar roadblock in that there was a great deal of laws in place that limited private development of space technology in India that had just been lifted. And so you were seeing lots of small companies begin to arise and come up. And I wonder if the lifting of some of these issues around rocket development might do the same thing in Korea.
That's a prospect that we're looking forward to, but haven't any seen tangible consequences as of yet.
That's a shame. That's a shame. So, as two people who are really interested in space and really interested in space development, what are your two future paths, considering that there are all these restrictions and these difficulties doing that sort of work in Korea?
Well, basically, I don't want to work on Korea about space settlement. So it can be a little confused to my parents, but I'd like to work on NASA on my future days after I graduate university, or I get some philosophy doctor course. Yeah, so I want to work on NASA and contacting with plenty of leading edge technologies on there, and with the most intelligence engineers from the world are working on NASA, I think. So maybe, yeah, I just want to work on NASA and prove my dream it comes true.
I,
So, oh, yeah.
I think that's I think that a lot of people around the world share that view. It's interesting that the new space movement over here in America, a lot of people sort of poo-poo NASA a little bit and say that NASA doesn't really know what they're doing anymore. But I think that the average person thinks the same way you do. NASA is still, despite everything, full of the most intelligent people doing some of the most incredible things in the world. How about you, Antonio? What are you looking to do after you're done with everything over there?
Well, so I've actually graduated high school in February. I mean, that's how the school system in Korea works. You graduate in February, and you started school in March. But then I've been admitted to a lot of school in the United States and United Kingdom, and I'll be starting my semester in Minerva schools at KGI, which is an American school. I mean, that's a unique school, and I could like go on about the school itself for like half an hour, but I won't do it here. But I'll be getting my master's at United States and also my PhD in aerospace engineering at some university in the United States. I think about Stanford or Caltech, places like those. And after my PhD, I think I would go into the private sector because although Jaehun mentioned NASA, I am more of a private sector guy. NASA is great. I've been doing great following NASA and their podcasts, their efforts, but how I'm a person who likes radical reasonings, radical ventures. So I would go into the private industry like Bigelow Aerospace or SpaceX, all those famous companies or other companies that's to come. So I'm looking forward to in the private sector, and ultimately I have to have my own company building space settlements, and I hope to see a space settlement up there by before I die, at least.
I think that's a hope everybody listening to this show is holding on to. I'll bet there's people who've been involved in this whole thing since the 60s who are listening to this going, yeah, me too, kid.
Right. I mean, anyone out there, please, like, if you have a company already out there building space settlement, contact me, please.
You can find Antonio's email connected to this podcast. Feel free to send him an email.
Please do.
No, I mean, it's interesting, and I mean, it's especially seeing as you're taking such a long academic path, it's fascinating to imagine what the landscape's going to look like once you get your PhD. I don't mean that in a way to disparage you spending so much time working on your education. That's that's a really great path that you're on. I only mean that in the past 10 years, so much has changed in space in the U.S. anyway. with all the new space companies coming up and doing all this crazy stuff and switching up the paradigm quite a lot, it's really interesting to think what another 10 years is going to do to that landscape, you know? I mean, I don't think that we're going to have space settlements or a great deal of space development in that time period just yet, but I think that the companies are going to be doing some really interesting stuff. That'll all be gone, one of the two. So if you guys were going to design another space settlement, what would you do differently about this project than Project Divinity?
Oh my, that's a hard question because you mean other from Project Divinity or the 7 space settlements that we have built?
Well, I was going to say, Antonio, I'm sure you have already done all the things that you wouldn't do in Project Divinity.
Right.
But what's the next step, you know, if you were going to refine the idea any further?
Well, it depends on which kind of space settlements it will be, because Project Divinity was envisioned as the first major space settlement. The background that we had for Project Divinity was kind of like a future in which there would be a lot of hotels, a lot of space development happening, and then we were just waiting for that big thing to come. I mean, we would have all those Bigelow Aerospace and those inflatable, commutable space hotels out there, and then we would need first industrial space settlement, and that was what Project Divinity was for. And with the start of with the start of something similar to Project Divinity, with an industrial platform, we can start going into some things much bigger and mining asteroids that would really give us the foundation for something to leap on. And with that background, we can actually go on to one of those Lagrange points and one of those kilometer-wide space settlements in a more real and practical manner. And what I actually look forward to, although this is also included in Project Divinity, is the arts and sports sector, because those are stuff that's not really highlighted too much on other space settlements. Space settlements tend to focus a lot on the mechanical and structural stuff, but when you actually get into how the arts or sports can be managed in space, and there was very and I mean sports. Just thinking about sports, microgravity can give you a lot of stuff. Like also in the Project Divinity, there's a Quidditch station right inside.
I saw that in the paper. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
I mean those of you who don't really know about Quidditch, is that a sports on a broom that you have in Harry Potter series. So that's one thing. Art is also another thing that I would really want to do. If you've seen ISS videos of having ink inside water bubbles, those are really super cool. And there has actually been artists who actually go up in microgravity planes to do microgravity art, and those, if you actually look at it, are very cool as well. And I really hope to see what will come around the corner. And I think there's also another thing that Jaehun really likes about microgravity arts.
Well, as Antonio mentioned, microgravity is brand new environment for mankind. You know that if we do something in space which we familiarly do in Earth, then maybe it will feel totally different. So, in the movie Interstellar, did you see it? Have you seen it? Yeah, in the end of Interstellar, there is some baseball game which is held on space settlement. Since the space settlement is some spherical structure, the ball maybe that's a home run ball. Home run ball goes up and broke down some house's window. So according to that, if we do some sexual things in the space, I thought that it will feel brand new, so totally different. So that's what I call Project P. It's a space porno, microgravity. So that's what I was really interested and focused on some recent few days.
I mean, it's a funny topic, but it's also somewhat true. I mean, I don't think it's going to be that long until you see a company interested in doing something like that. I mean,
you don't have to. There's already one out there. I mean, really. I think actually some of the viewers actually know this, but there was an Indiegogo campaign that about Project P that I think finished few months ago. I mean, not really. I mean, less than a few months ago.
Mm-hmm.
People who are interested should definitely look into it. But yes, it's something that a lot of people have already been interested in.
Mm-hmm. I'll bet. So you two have been absolutely fantastic. Thanks so much for the conversation, and there's certainly a lot of really interesting things to think about here, and congratulations on winning the prize. Is there anything you guys want to talk about before we go?
Well, one thing, if there's anyone out there who are interested in space settlement designs and want to contact to us,
Yeah.
and hopefully recruit us. We are always open to suggestions. Jaehun?
Yeah. Well, also in my case, for me, space settlement as a high school student, designing space settlement is not some kind of brand new research. So since the space is very unfamiliar and hard to contact, I cannot do some research about space or some big experiment about space. So what I focused on the whole project is mixing of some every recent research results.
Mm-hmm.
So I added, as I mentioned in previous speech, I mixed some radiation shielding and equatorial orbit as some ELEO, and I mixed very many theories and results in the project Divinity. So if someone who hearing this podcast has some recent research, or he thought if his stuff is mixed with our project, it can make better project, then please contact me and let me know what project, what research or what result is valuable or good for us.
Sure. And I'll, if you guys are okay with it, I'll put an email to contact you guys in with this show as well so that people can reach out to you if they want to.
Right. Oh, and can I have one more shout out?
Of course.
Right. I'm not sure. I'm not really sure the demographics of this show, but if there are any students out there who are doing space settlement contest, then I want to shout out to you. Space settlements. We are the generation that can actually build space settlements in space. I really do believe that we can do this in our lifetime. So if you've been doing space settlements, don't really let go of it, even after you graduate high school and going into college. Keep your interest on it. Continue working on it, develop and hone it. And I really hope to see you in a few decades' time up in space, building space settlements together.
Inspiring stuff. Thank you, guys.
Right.
Thank
All right.
you.
Hey folks, thanks for listening. I hope you guys really enjoyed the show. If you did, don't forget to let everyone else know by voting us 5 or giving us a thumbs up or leaving a review or however it is you do that wherever it is you listen to it. If you really like us, don't forget to follow us on Facebook, we're Voices from L5 on there, or on Twitter at Voices from L5. Big thank you to Cynthia Science for letting us use their music, and a huge shout out to Nick LaCrome, our $10 Patreon. Hey, if you guys want to support us, make sure we get amazing guests and fantastic equipment and be able to make the best show we can. Go to www.voicesfroml5.com to find out more. Lastly, huge thank you to the NSS for supporting us. We are still a NSS project, and it's been great. Thank you guys. Don't forget to go to www.nss.org to find out how to become a member of the biggest private citizen space settlement group in the world. Thanks.